The wilderness of America holds secrets that have endured for centuries, shadowed by whispers of strange disappearances and vanishing lives that haunt today's society. This tale begins in a remote region beyond the fringes of Yellowstone National Park, where dense forests and jagged mountains guard pockets of land scarcely touched by human presence. Here, the air feels thicker, as if burdened with the stories it cannot tell. My name is Special Agent Mariah Reed, and alongside my partner, Special Agent Brandon Tyler, we have stepped into the void where law and nature collide. Our assignment was to search for those lost and, if we can, to uncover what force is claiming them. Our investigation takes root in Ennis, Montana, a small town nestled near the Madison River Valley, flanked by 3 looming mountain ranges. Ennis is a place where beauty mingles with danger, where the sunlight can turn eerie as it filters through mist and towering pines, casting shadows that seem to move on their own. And it is here that the wilderness has started to consume more than just the unwary traveler. The people of Ennis speak in low voices, eyes cast downward, murmuring of loved ones gone without a trace. They speak of empty homes, unanswered calls, and search parties finding nothing but unsettling silence. In recent months, the count of the vanished has grown into the hundreds, with families desperately clinging to the hope that some hint of their loved ones might emerge from the relentless wilds. The local authorities, as if infected by the suffocating mystery, offer only silence. Officials stumble over explanations and whisper reassurances that sound hollow. There is nothing to explain what is happening, nothing to ease the feeling that something unseen is feeding on the edges of civilization. This silence, this vacuum of answers, calls for deeper, colder inquiry. The F.B.I.'s Missing Persons Task Force is dispatched, trained to confront even the shadows that ordinary lawmen dare not chase. Ennis, Montana, with its remote beauty, is a far cry from our usual haunts, but the urgency here is palpable. We are told the disappearances began outside Yellowstone, in a place known for hiking trails, but also for its dangerous isolation, where mountain lions and black bears roam. Yet, even these wild animals are not enough to explain the scale of the vanishings or the dread that thickens as we draw near. Just 2 weeks ago, 2 hikers vanished without a trace. Not a boot print, not a thread of fabric. Before that, a group of 6 vanished as if swallowed by the land itself, and before them others, more nameless. Each case a lonely echo that grows louder as the disappearances accumulate. We gather our gear and prepare for a journey that feels like it should come with a warning etched into the bark of some ancient tree. Yellowstone National Park may be a haven of natural splendor, but it is also a vast, unyielding wilderness, a place where humanity's presence is a thin veneer. As we enter its borders, the air seems to weigh heavier, holding the voices of those who have vanished. It feels as though we have crossed a threshold into a place not meant for us. Brandon and I meet the local authorities, their faces shadowed by worry and a grim resignation. Sheriff Colton, an older man weathered by years and haunted by unanswered calls, grips our hands, his gaze dark with a strange apology. He speaks of the search teams, the helicopters, the tracking dogs, each effort swallowed by the land itself. They've scoured riverbeds, scrambled over treacherous ledges, pushed through forests so dense with twisted brambles that they cling to you, almost alive, almost unwilling to let go. Every search has returned empty, leaving only silence and the unnerving feeling that these woods consume more than just echoes. Sheriff Colton spoke, unable to give us any answers.
Agent Reed, we've found nothing. No trace of them, not even footprints. It's as if the mountain itself swallowed them whole.
Sheriff Colton, there has to be something we're missing. People don't just vanish like this. Brandon and I exchange a glance. Sheriff Colton's words hang in the air, strange and unsettling, yet the look in his eyes tells us he means every one of them. With a quiet nod, the sheriff offers to guide us into the wilderness, and together we cross into the shadows. Under a sky streaked with iron-gray clouds, we begin our journey into the unknown. The deeper we trek, the more the forest seems to close in, swallowing familiar sounds and pulling us into a world untouched by light or reason. Towering trees loom like silent sentinels, their branches twisted into shapes that seem almost alive, as though concealing secrets too dark to face the sun. We walk in near silence, our every step crunching against brittle leaves, echoing too loudly in the stillness. The chill wraps around us, seeping into our bones, an embrace that feels less like welcome and more like warning. Shadows shift at the corners of our vision, and each footfall grows heavier, as if some unseen force is anchoring us, drawing us toward a line we cannot see but instinctively fear. It feels as though something out here is waiting, pulling us deeper, testing our resolve against the oppressive quiet. We press on, caught between dread and duty, sensing we've already trespassed into something unspeakable.
Mariah, do you feel like we're being watched?
Brandon, I feel it too. Stay sharp, you and Sheriff Colton. Something's off. Sheriff Colton checks his rifle, but I stay silent, feeling the prickle at the back of my neck, the uneasy certainty that we're not alone. Eyes, unseen and patient, seem to track us from the shadows. My gaze sweeps over the tree line, half expecting a figure to emerge from the gloom, a flicker of movement that would confirm our worst suspicions. But the forest stands silent and unyielding, as if mocking our fear. The investigation has barely begun, yet a chill runs through me, whispering that we've already gone too far, stepped over some unseen threshold. The ground underfoot feels subtly, almost imperceptibly, wrong, like the earth shifts ever so slightly with each step, pulsing beneath us as though resenting our every intrusion. It feels alive in some impossible, dreadful way, as if the land itself is watching, tightening its hold with each passing moment. A coldness deeper than the autumn air wraps around us, settling into our bones. I try to shake the feeling, but it clings like fog, thick and inescapable. With each footfall, I wonder if we're descending not into the forest, but into something far older, something that sees us as intruders. And I can't shake the sense that it's waiting, patient and silent, for us to make the wrong move. We set up base camp in an old abandoned cabin, its weathered wood groaning under the weight of years and secrets. The air inside was heavy, carrying the scent of damp rot and something faintly metallic, as though the cabin itself remembered the things it had witnessed. Sheriff Colton stayed behind, rifle close at hand, while Brandon and I prepared to investigate the site of a recent disappearance, our weapons never leaving our sides. The forest greeted us with a hollow silence as we ventured deeper, its shadows lengthening like grasping fingers. The trail twisted and narrowed, every crack of a branch underfoot reverberating in the stillness. 15 minutes later, we arrived at the site, a place that should have held answers but instead felt suffocatingly empty. The clearing yawned before us, eerily devoid of any sign of life or struggle. No broken branches, no scraps of clothing, no footprints in the soft soil. It was as if the earth had swallowed every trace, leaving the space unnervingly pristine. Brandon and I exchanged a glance, unease pooling in the spaces between our words. The silence was oppressive, almost sentient, and the void before us felt deliberate, a stark warning written in absence. Whatever had happened here had left no room for explanation, only a chilling sense that we were trespassing somewhere we didn't belong.
Mariah, there's nothing. No trace, no sign, just nothing.
Brandon, there's nothing on the ground but look, about 10 feet up that pine. See those fresh scratches?
Wow, Mariah, I see them. But what on earth could make scratches that deep, that high, and leave no footprints?
Brandon, I have no idea, but whatever did this is massive. We wandered toward a small creek nearby, the sound of trickling water a faint reprieve from the suffocating stillness. The air felt heavier here, as though the forest itself was watching, holding its breath. We walked the length of the creek bed, our eyes scanning for tracks or clues, the crunch of gravel beneath our boots the only sound accompanying us. At first, the area seemed as barren as the rest, yielding nothing. But as we reached a bend where the creek met the shore, something caught our attention. Hidden from view until now, it came into stark focus, a massive footprint etched deep into the damp earth. It was grotesque in its size, far too large to belong to anything human, and yet unmistakably shaped like a bare foot. Brandon and I froze, the air around us growing colder. The placement was baffling, perched precariously where the embankment sharply rose. It wasn't just improbable, it was impossible. No human, Nothing should have been able to leave such a mark in such a position. My mind reeled, struggling to rationalize it. A prank? A trick of erosion? Yet nothing about it felt natural. Brandon's face paled, his shock mirroring my own. As the shadows lengthened, we agreed to return tomorrow. The darkness was closing in, and something about the forest now felt far more dangerous than before.
I don't know what that was, but it's close.
Yeah, we need to get out of here, now. When we finally returned to the cabin, Sheriff Colton had a fire roaring in the fireplace and some food ready, but the warmth did little to ease the tension gripping us. Brandon and I wasted no time, recounting the massive footprint, the deep scratches etched high into the tree, and the eerie, guttural roar that still echoed in our minds. Sheriff Colton's expression darkened, his dismay palpable. After a heavy pause, he began to speak, his voice low and weighted. "There's an old tale," he said, eyes flickering to the fire as though searching for the courage to continue. "The natives here tell of a Sasquatch, a giant roaming these woods. It's just a myth, they say. But myths often have roots." He told us of the creature, a hulking figure who once lived in peace, keeping to the shadows of the forest with its family. But long ago, the militia discovered them, and what followed was slaughter. Its family was massacred, leaving only one survivor. Consumed by vengeance, the creature hunted its tormentors, dismantling them one by one. Over a century has passed, yet the story persists. A lone, vengeful beast still stalking the forest, preying on those who trespass too deeply. Colton's voice faltered as he spoke of a twist in the tale. The creature, it said, had a sibling, a brother. Driven by lineage and duty, the sibling tracked the rogue Sasquatch, resulting in brutal, earth-shaking battles. The two would clash until both vanished, retreating to some hidden realm untouched by human eyes.
The natives say the Sasquatch shouldn't harm humans. It's taboo. But this one broke the rules, and that's why the myth endures. Something keeps it alive.
The fire crackled, and for a moment, none of us spoke. The story hung heavy, as if the forest itself were bearing down on us. We huddled around the cabin's dim light, the flickering fire casting uneasy shadows as we reviewed the day's findings, the massive footprint, the deep gouges in the tree, and the eerily pristine creek bed. The myth of the Sasquatch lingered in our thoughts, as absurd as it seemed. Could the legend be more than just a story? Sheriff Colton's usual skepticism wavered, his furrowed brow betraying the seeds of doubt. Outside, the forest seemed to breathe, its rhythmic rustling unnervingly steady. The woods had grown quiet, almost too quiet, as if they too were listening. The air inside the cabin was thick with tension, a fragile calm masking the unease beneath. As we prepared for bed, Sheriff Colton volunteered for watch duty, his rifle resting beside him. The fire crackled softly, its glow dimming as the night deepened. The cabin creaked with the shifting wind, a sound that felt far too alive. The stillness grew heavier, wrapping around us like the forest itself had seeped inside. Sometime after midnight, the quiet took hold completely. One by one, exhaustion claimed us all, and even Sheriff Colton, despite his steadfast resolve, succumbed to the pull of sleep. The cabin fell silent, the fire reduced to embers, and outside, the woods seemed to wait, cloaked in an unsettling stillness that felt anything but calm. A sudden, thunderous bang rattled the side of the cabin, followed by another and another, each impact reverberating like stones hurled with violent force. The sound was immense, shaking the very walls around us, as though the forest itself had turned hostile. Heart pounding, I crept to the window, Brandon close behind. We dared to lift the edge of the blinds just enough to peer into the darkness. The moonlight cast faint, eerie shadows across the woods, but nothing moved. The trees stood still, their branches swaying gently in the wind, as if mocking the chaos we'd heard. Yet the sense of being watched was suffocating. the silence outside unnaturally thick. Whatever had struck the cabin left no trace, but its presence lingered, unseen and oppressive, waiting just beyond the veil of night. The relentless thudding against the cabin sent shivers through the walls and through us. Each impact felt like the earth itself was striking out, the sound raw and furious. Sheriff Colton gripped his rifle tightly, his jaw clenched as he took aim at the door, ready for whatever might come bursting through. The air was thick with fear, every breath shallow and quick. Brandon and I flanked the door, weapons drawn, our hands trembling despite our resolve. Then, as suddenly as it began, the noise stopped. The silence that followed was deafening, pressing down on us like a physical weight. We exchanged uneasy glances, each of us straining to hear anything beyond the crackling embers of the dying fire. The absence of sound was almost worse than the chaos, pregnant with a sinister intent, as if the forest were holding its breath. My voice barely audible over the pounding of my heart. Whatever was out there wanted us gone. The message was clear, and yet there was no trace of our tormentor. No shadows darting between the trees, no footsteps retreating into the night. Then it came, a roar, low and guttural, reverberating through the stillness like a predator claiming its territory. My stomach twisted as the sound pierced the silence, unmistakably inhuman. Every instinct screamed to run, but I forced myself to stay rooted, gripping my weapon as tightly as I gripped my composure. Sheriff Colton's eyes locked with mine, and in that moment, no words were needed. Whatever was out there was watching, waiting, and far too close.
Sheriff Colton, I don't think whatever's out there is just a myth.
Yeah, that felt like a warning. Whatever it is, it's massive. Those rocks were practically boulders.
Could this entity be the cause of the disappearances? The question hung in the air like a shadow, refusing to be dismissed. Yet, leaving wasn't an option. The truth was out there, lurking in the darkness, and we had to face it, whatever it might be. Unease settled over us as we finally succumbed to exhaustion, stealing a few restless hours of sleep under the faint glow of the cabin's embers. Every creak, every gust of wind outside felt like a whisper of something waiting just beyond our reach. Morning couldn't come fast enough. When the first gray light seeped through the blinds, we gathered our resolve and stepped into the forest. The air was damp and cold, carrying a weight that seemed to sink deeper with every step. The towering pines around us stretched skyward like sentinels, their gnarled branches clawing at the pale morning sky. As we surveyed the scene, the forest began to reveal its scars. Trees, massive, ancient, stood splintered and snapped, their trunks severed like brittle twigs. The jagged breaks looked fresh, as though something impossibly strong had torn through them without hesitation.
What could have done this?
I didn't answer, the question echoing in my mind as I studied the unnatural devastation. Further into the woods, the evidence grew even more chilling. Among the damp leaves and earth, another footprint emerged, massive, grotesque, and unmistakably fresh. It was similar to the print we'd seen before, its presence an undeniable statement. My chest tightened as I stared at it. Whatever had made this footprint was far beyond human, far beyond anything we were prepared to face. Yet here we were, standing at the edge of its domain, daring to uncover what should have remained buried. Our thoughts lingered on the vanished hikers, their fate a haunting mystery that weighed heavily on our minds. We had to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. That morning, the forest seemed darker, more oppressive, as though it resented our presence. The deeper we ventured, the heavier the atmosphere grew, every shadow stretching just a little too long. At the scene, we found a single massive footprint embedded in the damp earth, a chilling echo of the one we'd discovered before. Near it, the creek bed we'd searched earlier revealed fresh disruptions, the scattered remnants of large rocks that had been hurled at the cabin, yet no sign of the assailant. No trail, no broken branches, nothing to suggest where something that large could have vanished so quickly. The sensation of being watched returned, creeping up my spine like icy fingers. It wasn't overtly hostile this time, but it carried a strange weight, almost as if whatever lingered in the shadows was observing us with curiosity, concern. The thought sent an unsettling shiver through me. Sheriff Colton focused on the creek bed, combing through the area for anything we might have missed. Brandon and I moved cautiously into the adjacent woods, staying close enough to keep Colton within eyesight. The silence between us was unnerving, broken only by the crunch of leaves beneath our boots. The woods felt alive, not just in the way of swaying trees and rustling undergrowth, but as if the forest itself was watching, breathing, waiting. Each step forward felt like a step closer to something unknown, and potentially something we weren't ready to meet. "Everyone come here! There's reddish-brown hair caught on this tree branch."
Look at that. Reddish-brown hair over 6 feet up on that branch. What could possibly be that tall?
That looks like a shoulder imprint, like something was leaning against the tree.
The air hung heavy with a sharp, pungent smell that seemed to seep into everything, sour and unmistakably unnatural. It clung to the back of my throat, setting my nerves on edge. Despite the overpowering scent, the area around us remained eerily pristine. No footprints, no broken branches, nothing to suggest an intruder had been here at all, save for the chilling evidence we'd already uncovered. High in the tree, the reddish-brown hair caught the light, a stark and unsettling contrast against the bark. Brandon and I worked in tense silence, carefully retrieving the strands and sealing them in a plastic bag. The hair felt coarse, almost wiry, as though it belonged to something not entirely of this world. I slipped the sample into my research kit, my hands trembling slightly as I secured the latch. Meanwhile, at the footprint, its sheer size seemed to taunt us, a grotesque reminder of the enormity of whatever we were dealing with. The imprint was too detailed, too fresh to dismiss. With methodical precision, I poured the casting material, my unease growing as the mold solidified, capturing the impossible truth beneath us. We gathered our findings, every motion deliberate, every sound amplified in the oppressive stillness. As we packed up, the forest seemed to exhale, its silence filling the void once more. Whatever had been here was gone now, but its presence lingered, etched into the very air around us. As twilight faded into evening, we made our cautious return to the cabin, weapons in hand and senses on high alert. The creature's whereabouts were unknown, a shadowy presence that could be anywhere or nowhere. Every rustle of leaves or snap of a branch felt like a warning, each sound amplified by the oppressive stillness around us. Back at the cabin, the fire crackled weakly, but its warmth did little to ease the chill in the air, or in our nerves. We turned over the evidence again, the massive footprint, the coarse reddish-brown hair, the eerie stillness of the forest. The idea that Sasquatch, Bigfoot, could be real hung heavily between us. Was it an undiscovered species, an ancient entity hidden from humanity, or something even more unthinkable? Whatever it was, the notion seemed to warp the very fabric of reality, leaving us uneasy and restless. Outside, the woods felt alive, its unseen eyes pressing against the walls of the cabin. It wasn't just fear, it was a primal certainty that we were being observed, watched, waited for. The night deepened, shadows thickening around us as we huddled near the fire. Then, it began. A deafening crash shattered the silence as large rocks slammed into the cabin, one after another, each impact reverberating through the walls like a heartbeat. Sheriff Colton bolted upright, grabbing his rifle with the steadiness of someone who had faced danger before, but still felt its weight. His expression was hard, but I caught the flicker of unease in his eyes. We exchanged tense glances, the firelight casting jagged shadows across our faces. Whatever was out there wasn't hiding anymore. It wanted us to know it was there.
I'm going out there. Whatever's lurking in those woods, we have to face it.
No, Sheriff, it's too dangerous. Please don't go out there.
I'm with Mariah on this. Sheriff, whatever's out there wants us to panic. It's trying to lure us into a trap.
Before we could exchange another word, Sheriff Colton, rifle gripped tightly in hand, moved toward the back door of the cabin. His eyes were steely, his movements deliberate, a man confronting fear head-on. Without a word, he slipped into the darkness beyond, the door creaking shut behind him. For a moment, there was only silence, the kind that hums in your ears and gnaws at your nerves. Then, the sharp crack of a gunshot split the night, echoing through the trees like a lightning strike. We froze, breaths caught in our throats, straining to hear anything. Another shot, footsteps, a shout. But the forest fell deathly quiet. The unnatural stillness pressed against the cabin like a suffocating weight. I called out, my voice trembling as it carried Sheriff Colton's name into the void. No answer, just an empty, hollow silence that seemed to mock me. Brandon grabbed his weapon and stepped outside, his silhouette swallowed almost immediately by the oppressive darkness. I stayed at the door, heart pounding, gripping my own firearm with white-knuckled hands. The seconds stretched into lifetimes as I listened for any sign of them. "Sheriff!" Brandon's voice rang out, firm at first but growing more frantic with each call. He circled the perimeter, his flashlight beam slicing through the shadows, but there was nothing, no sign of movement, no tracks, not even a rustle of leaves. It was as though the woods had devoured Colton, leaving no trace behind. Brandon turned back to me, his face pale, eyes wide with disbelief. "He's gone," he murmured, the words heavy with dread. The forest loomed around us, vast and impenetrable, as if it had secrets it would never relinquish. Whatever had taken Colton had done so with terrifying precision, and it felt like we were next. A chilling wave of terror gripped me, locking my breath in my chest as the enormity of our predicament sank in. Brandon's hands shook as he clutched the radio, desperately cycling through channels, his voice taut with urgency. The response was the same every time, a dead hiss of static. We were too far, too isolated, trapped in the heart of a wilderness that swallowed signals and people whole. Sheriff Colton was gone. Not a sound, not a footprint, not even the faintest whisper of his presence remained. It was as if the forest itself had consumed him, erasing him from existence. A cold, creeping dread coiled around me, tighter with every passing second. Whatever was out there wasn't an aimless predator. It was deliberate, calculated, and terrifyingly patient. I could feel its presence lingering just beyond the veil of trees, an oppressive weight that bore down on us, watching, waiting. The cabin no longer felt like a sanctuary, but a fragile shell, its thin walls useless against the vast, malevolent force circling us. The night grew heavier, suffocating, as though the wilderness had closed its grip entirely. And then it hit me. We weren't just being hunted. We were already ensnared, tangled in the creature's web with no way to escape the trap it had laid.
The sheriff has vanished, and with no signal, we're completely cut off from the outside world.
Whatever that thing is, it's out there, waiting. We need to stay vigilant and tread carefully. Brandon and I knew we couldn't stay frozen in fear. Sheriff Colton was out there alive or not, we had to find him. The cabin walls felt suffocating, barely holding back the terror of the unknown. We were shaken to our core, but leaving him to whatever roamed these woods was unthinkable. Still, the forest was impenetrable at night, a labyrinth of shadow and silence. Venturing out blindly would only add us to the list of the missing. We waited, tense and sleepless, as the hours crawled by. The first pale light of dawn seeped through the cracks of the cabin. The silence was unnerving. No rocks battered the cabin, no unnatural howls echoed through the trees. It was as if the forest itself had drawn a breath, holding us in a disquieting stillness. With weapons ready, we stepped cautiously into the woods, the morning mist coiling around us like ghostly tendrils. Brandon took the lead, scanning the underbrush and tree lines as we pushed deeper into the unknown. Every step felt heavier, as though the forest resisted our intrusion. Then, out of the fog, a structure loomed. It was crudely built of massive trees entangled with branches and leaves, a nest perhaps, but far too large for any natural creature. Dread prickled at my skin as we approached, each step feeling like a transgression. The silence grew thicker, oppressive, and then I felt it, that unnerving, unseen gaze. Something was watching us, close and deliberate, its presence heavy in the air. A chill gripped my chest as the horrifying truth sank in. We were no longer pursuing something, we had become its prey. Brandon, do you sense that?
Yeah, Mariah, it feels like something's watching us.
Weapons in hand, we barely had time to react. Rocks, hurled with unnerving precision, slammed against us, forcing us to drop our firearms. Pain shot through my hands as the weapons clattered to the ground, and then chaos erupted. From the shadows, a massive figure surged forward. It was an enormous, black-furred creature, easily 8 feet tall, its hulking frame dwarfing both Brandon and me. In a single swift motion, it grabbed Brandon, slamming him to the ground and rendering him unconscious. My body froze, rooted by a terror so profound, it felt like my mind had detached from reality. The beast loomed over me, its presence more overwhelming than anything I had ever imagined. It didn't roar or snarl, its silence was worse. It didn't feel like a wild animal, it felt deliberate, almost calculating. My instincts screamed at me to run, to fight, but my limbs refused to obey. Without a word, the creature seized us both, hoisting us as though we weighed nothing. Its monstrous arms encased us like steel, and it moved swiftly into the depths of the forest, carrying us as if we were lifeless bundles of cloth. The stench was unbearable, an acrid, almost putrid musk that seemed to cling to the air around it. It suffocated my senses, and as the beast barreled through the dark woods, the nausea overtook me. The world blurred, my mind retreating into blackness. When I woke, the night had given way to dim light filtering through a clearing. A vast, uncharted lake stretched out before me, surrounded by towering peaks. The creature had deposited us in some remote corner of the wilderness, far beyond any familiar landmarks. My head pounded as I struggled to sit up, only to see Sheriff Colton sprawled nearby. He was a battered wreck, his body broken and bloody, as if he'd been struck by an unstoppable force. His breaths came in shallow gasps, his consciousness flickering like a failing flame. A few yards away, I spotted Brandon, stirring as he regained consciousness. Miraculously, he seemed unharmed. I waved both hands frantically, catching his attention. He locked eyes with me, and I gestured urgently for him to approach. Brandon rose cautiously, his movements slow and deliberate, as though fearing the unseen presence still watching us. His face reflected the same terror that gripped me. We were alive, for now, but the beast wasn't done with us. The question gnawed at me. Why had we been spared the same fate as Sheriff Colton? His broken, bloodied body was a stark warning of what this creature could do. Yet here we were, alive, bruised but intact. The creature's rancid stench lingered faintly in the air, a grim reminder that it was still nearby, lurking just beyond the shadows. Brandon and I worked frantically to stabilize Sheriff Colton. His breathing was shallow, his injuries severe, but we weren't about to give up on him or on each other. We had come into these cursed woods together, and no matter the cost, we were determined to leave the same way. Our resolve hardened under the weight of the unknown, a pact silently forged in the face of the darkness surrounding us. As night descended, the chill of the wilderness wrapped around us like a shroud. We needed warmth, light, a fire. Gathering wood was an act of necessity, but also of desperation, every rustle of leaves or snapping branch setting our nerves on edge. Along the shoreline, something unexpected stopped us in our tracks. A small pile of fish lay neatly arranged, as if left there intentionally. For us. The gesture was unsettling, more a question than an offering. Why would it feed us? What did it want? Unease gnawed at the edges of my mind, but hunger overruled caution. Back at the makeshift camp, the fire crackled to life, casting flickering shadows that danced like specters against the surrounding trees. The fish sizzled over the flames, the smell of cooking food mingling with the faint, foul stench of the creature. As we ate in strained silence, every noise from the forest felt amplified. The snap of a twig, the distant rustle of undergrowth, the wind stirring the trees like whispered warnings. The fire's warmth offered little comfort, and instead of easing our fear, it felt like a beacon, drawing unseen eyes to our vulnerable circle of light. We were not alone, and whatever watched us from the darkness wasn't done. The deafening roar split the air, sending shockwaves through the dense woods. The sound reverberated off the trees, closing in fast like a storm bearing down. Dread pooled in the pit of my stomach as the ground beneath us seemed to quake with approaching footsteps. Whatever was coming wasn't just large, it was fury embodied. The cacophony of splintering trees filled the air, the forest trembling as if bowing to its king. Then it appeared, a massive figure emerging from the shadows, its reddish-brown fur glinting in the faint light. This was not the creature that had abducted us, but another, just as enormous, just as terrifying. Its sheer size dwarfed us, its feral eyes burning with rage. I could barely breathe as it turned its gaze on Brandon, its primal snarl shaking me to my core. The beast charged, closing the distance between them with horrifying speed. Brandon froze, helpless against the oncoming tide of muscle and fury, but before it reached him, another roar erupted from the woods, louder and more commanding, halting the creature mid-charge. The forest fell silent, the air heavy with tension. Then came the sound of deliberate, thunderous footsteps, each one shaking the earth. From the shadows stepped another figure, the black-furred beast, its eyes glowing like embers. The two titans faced each other, their animosity palpable. The reddish-brown creature snarled, its posture shifting into a defensive stance, while the black one moved with a measured calm that was even more unsettling. And then they clashed. The forest seemed to hold its breath as the two behemoths tore into each other with primal ferocity. Each blow landed with the force of a thunderclap, shaking the ground beneath us. From our vantage point in the moonlight, the myth Sheriff Colton had recounted crystallized into horrifying truth. Two brothers locked in eternal combat. One, an agent of vengeance, consumed by its hatred of humanity. The other, a silent guardian, protecting the fragile boundary between us and the wilderness. We could only watch, paralyzed by awe and terror, as the battle unfolded, a war that had raged long before our time, now drawn into our fragile reality. The clash of titans reverberated through the wilderness, each deafening impact shaking the very ground beneath our feet. Trees splintered like matchsticks, the air filled with guttural roars, and the sickening crunch of wood and earth torn asunder. The battle raged with a primal intensity, their monstrous forms barely visible through the dark veil of the forest. This was our chance. "Brandon! They're still at it. Let's hope we can use this distraction to make it out alive."
Mariah, I swear. If it takes every ounce of strength I have, I'll get us all out of here.
Brandon and I hurriedly grabbed the makeshift wooden sled carrying Sheriff Colton, his unconscious form a grim reminder of the stakes. Every muscle in my body screamed, but fear propelled me forward. The faint glow of the compass guided us, its flickering light barely piercing the oppressive darkness. The forest seemed alive, a sinister spectator to our desperate escape. Branches clawed at us, the underbrush snagging our feet as if trying to hold us back. Each crack of the beast's blows in the distance sent jolts of adrenaline through my veins. Behind us, the battle's fury escalated, the roars now a cacophony of rage. The trees quivered under the force of their war, a reminder that we were mere ants scurrying beneath giants. Sheriff Colton's sled skidded over the uneven terrain, the weight of his body a constant drag against our frantic pace. The earth trembled beneath us as the monstrous battle raged on, each savage blow echoing through the forest like thunder. Between the dense trees, we caught fleeting, terrifying glimpses of the titans locked in feral combat. Their roars reverberated through the wilderness, shaking it to its core, their rage tearing apart the very fabric of the night. Then, without warning, the chaos ceased. A suffocating silence descended, so profound it felt like the forest itself held its breath. We froze in place, hearts pounding, ears straining for the faintest sound. But there was nothing, only the eerie stillness of a world on edge. We had put distance between ourselves and the battle, but the weight of its aftermath clung to us. The shattered wilderness whispered of a terrible power unleashed. As we pushed forward, we stumbled into a clearing bathed in cold, silvery light. The full moon hung low in the sky, its pale glow stark against the inky void. The beauty of the clearing was haunting, its stillness unsettling. We were far from the cabin, yet not far enough from the horrors lurking in the darkness. The journey ahead loomed vast and perilous, each step carrying us deeper into the unknown, with the memory of that silence and what it might mean, chilling us to the core. We couldn't stop. To linger was to invite death. The bone-rattling roar shattered the night, reverberating through the wilderness and freezing us in place. The silence that followed was fleeting, broken by a series of thunderous crashes heading directly for us. The sound of snapping trees and heavy, relentless footsteps grew louder, faster, and more terrifying. We ran, dragging the makeshift sled with Sheriff Colton's injured body, our breaths ragged and hearts hammering. But the thing chasing us was impossibly fast. Its footsteps outpaced ours with horrifying ease. We couldn't leave the sheriff, and yet escape seemed impossible. And then it appeared. Towering and monstrous, the black Sasquatch emerged from the shadows, its massive form blocking our path. Its eyes, dark as the abyss, pierced through the dim light of the forest. For a moment, I thought was the end, but then I saw it. The reddish-brown Sasquatch draped across its back like a broken doll. The black creature's battered face was unreadable, a mask of primal resolve and unyielding dominance. It didn't attack. Instead, it turned, its enormous frame disappearing into the dense, untouched wilderness. With each heavy step, it carried its defeated counterpart deeper into the shadows, back to a realm no human dared to tread. The forest fell deathly quiet once more. The fate of the missing hikers lingered as an unsolved enigma, shrouded in the impenetrable darkness of the mountainous wilderness. Its secrets, steeped in silence, retreated into the shadows, hidden, untold, and perhaps never meant to be uncovered. We survived, but at a cost. Sheriff Colton remains in the hospital, while Brandon and I are tortured by the memories. Our frightening testimony won us an indefinite vacation from the F.B.I.'s investigative division. The universe is full of mysteries, phenomena that defy logic or explanation. The unending conflict between good and evil takes place not just within people, but also in the dark depths of untamed wilderness. Whatever lives in those undiscovered mountains deserves respect, a power that cannot be fully understood or disregarded. We were fortunate to escape, but the incident left an unforgettable impression. The story persists, carved in our brains and emotions, a sobering reminder that certain stories transcend time, screaming warnings in the solitude of the wilderness.